This is Macro Analytics, delivering frank conversations on global macroeconomics and market analysis outside the mainstream, featuring discussions and debates between Gordon T. Long, publisher and editor of GordonTLong.com, and his guests. The content of this discussion is strictly the opinion of the participants. It is in no way a solicitation for business, nor is it to be considered investment advice of any sort. Always consult a registered investment advisor before making any investment decision. These discussions are extremely hard-hitting and terribly frank, and parental discretion is advised. Now, on to the show.
Good morning. I'm Gord Long with GordonTLong.com. As part of our ongoing series on financial repression, I have Simon Black joining us this morning from Chile. Simon is the publisher of SovereignMan.com website and also the Sovereign Man Confidential, an international investment intelligence service. Welcome, Simon.
Thanks for the invitation.
I'm glad you could join us, and I'm glad we got such a good link here this morning.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm down here at my farm in Chile, and like I told you earlier, we're actually rocking our own 4G WiMAX connection, so loud and clear.
Simon, maybe we could begin with you giving our listeners a brief overview of your background, your involvements, and how you came to doing this sort of work.
Well, like a lot of things in life, you just sort of fall into it by accident. My background is actually in the military. I graduated from West Point and found myself in the let's call it the most recent conflicts in the very early days, even before the invasion of Iraq. I was there with my unit as a young intelligence officer, sitting on the border between Kuwait and Iraq. So tens of thousands of troops there, kind of waiting for George W. Bush to give the order to go north. And that was when I really had my first great philosophical awakening. It was at that point that I felt like the government was lying about weapons of mass destruction, and if they were lying about weapons of mass destruction, then what else were they lying about? Turns out quite a bit. They're lying about the preservation of the purchasing power of currency and the nature of the system of taxation, and essentially everything that I grew up believing about a representative democracy in general. You find that the people that you go to the voting booth and elect aren't in charge of anything. It's actually a tiny, unelected group of central bankers that has almost totalitarian control over the money supply that affects nearly every purchasing decision that we make as consumers. And all this stuff I sort of realized now about, 13 years ago when we were there. It's my life has kind of been one adventure after another ever since. At this point, I travel extensively. I probably hit 40 or 50 countries in a year. I've been to 116 countries and counting, and try and dedicate our professional business, Sovereign Man, to actually finding solutions for people to the things that we talk about, whether it's financial repression or the erosion of freedom. We try and actually find real, credible solutions that make sense no matter what scenario plays out.
That's why I'm excited this morning to talk to you, Simon, to really talk about your approach and direction and intelligence to finding solutions. Maybe we could begin, though, with defining financial repression, because that's what we're here to discuss this morning, in your words, and how you've come to look at it and view it, and maybe more so than just the United States, but on a global basis.
Well, I think financial repression is theft. That's the only way that I would really describe it. It's a very clever, cunning, deceitful form of theft, but that's essentially what it is. A classic example, just on a conceptual basis, is inflation. We're seeing this right now, where in many cases you have to pay a bankrupt government for the privilege of loaning them money. Inflation, interest rates when adjusted for inflation are negative. You hold money in a bank account, you're getting 1/100th of 1% interest. And of course, even if you believe the government's guerrilla math that inflation is only 2%, you're losing money when adjusted for inflation. And so those are all examples of financial repression. But essentially, what that is theft. They're stealing the purchasing power. They're defaulting on their obligation to maintain a sound currency. But it comes in so many different forms. The post that we just released today for our readers in Sovereign Man was something we found, some leaked documents coming out of Ukraine. And of course, Ukraine is in pretty serious financial trouble right now. They're essentially the cash savings of the nation is depleted rather substantially. Their foreign reserves are now less than $10 billion. This is very small when considering the size of the economy, the population, and of course the rather prodigious debt that they're dealing with in Ukraine. $10 billion is just a drop in the bucket. And where we're at right now in Ukraine is the government is trying everything they can. They have restricted bank withdrawals and international transfers, essentially locking people down with capital controls to ensure that you can't actually solve your financial repression problem. Now they've got new proposals that were leaked. That we got a hold of these documents and sent out to folks to show that the government they're going to stop having state-funded education and making people pay for primary education. They're reducing primary education from 11 years to 9 years. They're doing away with the healthcare benefits. They're freezing pensions right now. They're increasing the amount of time. They're increasing the ages at which people can start drawing pensions. And of course, my libertarian side thinks, well, that's great. The government's getting out of the education business. Government's getting out of the healthcare business. That's fine. The flip side of that, of course, is that they're not going to stop charging taxes. They, of course, will continue to collect taxes at the point of a gun. They just won't provide the services anymore that people are actually paying for. So again, it's just theft. All you're doing is when you're taking tax dollars and you're not, or bereavements in this case, you're not giving them any services in return. It's theft. And that's essentially what financial repression is. And I think as bankrupt governments become even more bankrupt, we start seeing more and more of these around the world.
And this is not unique to the United States. Most of the developed world with debt levels are doing this or practicing this kind of policy, are they not?
Absolutely. We either see that overtly or covertly. I think in the case of Ukraine, where they're saying, hey, we're going to still take your tax dollars, but we're not going to give you any services in exchange. That's an overt theft. I think what we're seeing with negative real interest rates, when you adjust for inflation and so forth, that's more covert theft, but we're still seeing it all over the world. Every one of these countries that's bankrupt has this problem. And, like it or not, it's a rather uncomfortable fact to face, but the fact is that the United States and most of the established Western hierarchy, France, Italy, Spain, etc., all these countries are bankrupt. It's not some sensationalist claim. Their own numbers say that they're bankrupt. The U.S. releases, the Government Accountability Office, the GAO in the United States releases these numbers every single year. They put together financial statements that show the U.S. government's assets and liabilities. And in this case, the liabilities far exceed the assets to the tune of almost $17 trillion. So that's, all the cash, all the land, every tank, every bullet, every supposedly ounce of gold that they have, every acre of land, etc., minus all the liabilities. The debt, the pension liabilities and so forth, we're talking minus $17 trillion. That's insolvent. This is a bankrupt nation. And people have to understand that and understand that when nations are bankrupt, that they have to resort to these sorts of tactics because there's no way out. Politicians will do anything they have to do to keep the party going just a little while longer, including theft, outright theft.
Are you currently still a holder of an American passport?
Yes, I do still hold a U.S. passport, but I hold multiple passports, not just a U.S. passport. For me, it's a very rational calculus. There's costs and benefits to everything. So the cost of maintaining a U.S. passport is sort of the direct financial cost or taxation. For me, the benefit, I still have family there, so it's nice to occasionally be able to come in and know that I always have permission to enter the country. But that's about it for me. I've managed to get my taxes under control and so forth. But it's a very simple cost-benefit analysis. I also have other passports as well from different places around the globe, and I'm working on others as well. And it's something that makes sense and something that really a lot of people can do. A lot of people would be surprised to find that they have an ancestor, Irish, Italian, Spanish, etc., that qualifies them for a passport in another country. A lot of people would be surprised to realize that you can actually obtain legal residency in another country, leave, not really spend any time in that country and come back in a couple of years and be able to qualify to apply for naturalization and get yourself another passport. All these things are actually possible, and they're nice things to have because if you live and work and invest and bank and save your money and hold your gold and have all of your employees and own your home and all these things in the same country of your citizenship, and that country happens to be bankrupt, you're really asking for trouble. When you look at it from a big picture perspective, it doesn't really make any sense to hold all of your eggs in one bankrupt, insolvent basket. And so having another passport does, provide some ways to mitigate that risk.
Well, Americans are facing FATCA now, all of the expats, and they say that they're screaming is an understatement. I don't know what your experience has been or what you're witnessing there.
I've seen everywhere around the world, I've seen people renouncing their U.S. citizenship primarily because of FATCA, the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. There's two, just in case your readers aren't familiar, I'm sure that your listeners are probably very familiar, in this case they're not. Two key provisions with FATCA are, one, it provides another layer of reporting for U.S. taxpayers that have foreign financial assets held overseas, bank accounts, brokerage accounts. There are certain exceptions. Gold, in many cases, can be an exception. Real estate can be an exception. But foreign financial accounts, if you imagine a bank account, these become reportable by U.S. taxpayers. They're already being reported on other forms. This is just, sort of classic government, left hand not talking to the right hand. So they decided to create another form to report the exact same information. The other requirement is with banks, and FATCA requires every single bank on the planet to get in bed with the IRS and agree to information sharing provisions with the IRS. And they basically have two ways. One is when the individual banks do it, and the other is when they create these government-to-government information sharing agreements. So, for example, the government of the UK, banks would share their information with the government of the UK, and the British government shares with the US government. But either way, creates additional layers of reporting and bureaucracy for the banks themselves. These are things that nobody feels like putting up with. Because of this, a lot of foreign banks have just decided to discontinue accounts of U.S. taxpayers. Even if you're a foreigner and they find out you're living in the United States, you could be a Frenchman living in the United States. The bank's not going to want to deal with you anymore because they don't want to have to mess around with FATCA and all the bureaucracy and so forth. And this has prompted a lot of people to actually renounce their U.S. citizenship. It's sad when you think about somebody who, as a last resort is divorcing themselves from their country because their country has put them, has put themselves at odds with one another. It's actually quite sad. But this is the stuff that happens when countries go bankrupt.
There seems to be indications that we may see GATCA, a global version of this, within the next 18 to 24 months after Russia, in fact, endorsed FATCA recently, or endorsed it, at least was going to be compliant with it. Comments there?
That's essentially what we have right now. FATCA is a global information sharing agreement because what this has essentially created is a mechanism for governments to share information with other governments. And so there's really no such thing as financial privacy anymore, at least not within the conventional mainstream financial system. And then any holdout is essentially being crucified rather publicly. So we're in a position now where every one of these governments is sharing information with one another. And the analogy I think that most appropriately serves it is it's just a bunch of drunken sailors holding each other up. It's a bunch of bankrupt nations who are relying on one another to spy on each other's citizens. And you look at it and you think, why don't you just be more productive? Why don't you just try and actually, instead of pushing everybody away until they renounce their citizenship, why don't you actually try and attract talent and capital and resources? Instead of being a negative and having a scarcity mentality, why not have an abundance mentality and say, hey, we welcome productive people. We're going to, instead of trying to chase everybody around for every last penny, how about you actually reduce taxes and give people an incentive to come and grow the economy? The interesting thing in the United States is if you look at the post-war levels of tax revenue in the United States, since the end of World War II, tax revenues in the United States have almost been exclusively roughly 17% of GDP. And so, in other words, the slice of the economic pie that the U.S. federal government receives, is almost constant at 17% of GDP. It goes up a little bit, it goes down a little bit, but more or less it stays at right around 17% of GDP. So raising taxes doesn't really increase their slice of the pie. Chasing people around the world and throwing people in jail doesn't increase their slice of the pie. You'd think with that kind of overwhelming data, they would just want to do everything they can to make the pie bigger. But they don't. That's not their mentality. Their mentality is to chase, pensioners and Social Security recipients and little old ladies and widows. I mean, I've seen this stuff, the way they throw people in jail and chase them around the ends of the earth. And, they took the oldest bank in Switzerland and shut them down. I mean, it's just sad, the sorts of things that they do. It's a scarcity mentality. They don't have this idea of let's be more competitive. That seems to be the basis upon which the ideals upon which the United States were founded. Now it's just chasing around little old ladies trying to get every tax dollar they can. They can't grow their slice of the pie. They can only help grow the pie itself. But that's just not the mentality that they have.
That's 180 degrees from what the country's basic premise and foundation started on, built the country. And I think it's a reflection when you start to get heavy centralization of economic and political power, this was what comes out of it, in my opinion. It's almost a natural evolution. Maybe it's an unnatural thing that you don't want, but it seems to always evolve, and history is replete with examples of this. And the solution is, to me, is decentralization. You agree with that?
100%. You raise actually a very good point. It's not. I mean, there's a lot of issues I think we have with the system. Obviously, fiat currency and unbacked paper currency is a massive problem. But I think the even larger problem behind that really is centralization. And anytime governments or any central authority comes in and tries to monopolize control over resources that's as important as something like the money supply, you have problems. There are a lot of great stories from history about this. I mean, I even would go back to the 13th century in France, and they had introduced a bimetallic standard there and tried to centralize the relationship between gold and silver. The government tried to fix the price between gold and silver, the gold-silver ratio, instead of leaving that over to the market to be decentralized. And of course, the government fixed this rate. And the rate that was that they commanded in France was different than the rate that they commanded in Venice. And so what happened is people realized that they could get more gold for their silver in Venice than they could in France. And so you could imagine all the silver flowed from France into Venice because they could get more gold in Venice. And then the gold flew back from Venice into France where they could get more silver. And the French government was going bankrupt from this. And so what do? They imposed capital controls, trying to prevent people from moving silver out of the country and so forth. And this stuff is just centuries old. You can go back so far throughout history and see any time that there's a central authority that tries to control something particularly as important as the money supply, there's always problems. There's always problems. The nice thing is that today, all of the tools and all the technologies and all the resources already exist to decentralize all those things. We don't need governments anymore. We don't need central banks anymore. All of these things actually already exist. All the technology already exists to make banks and the banking system completely obsolete. It's just a question of how quickly, it's just the adoption curve. How quickly will these technologies get adopted? There was a time when nobody had even heard of the internet, and it's only been probably 20 years, and now we can't imagine our lives without it. I think the same thing will happen to a lot of these new technologies, and we'll look back 20 years from now, and banking will be, will become this barbarous relic, if I could paraphrase Paul Krugman quoting John Maynard Keynes.
Yeah, please don't quote Krugman on this show. That's another discussion. We did extensive amount of work 2 years ago to show that globally, as countries were becoming more centralized, therefore they become more authoritarian. What comes out of it is you get crony capitalism, you get policies such as financial repression, and you move towards statism, and how that through monetary malpractice really fosters it. But it all starts the moment you move from sound money. That is the fence that keeps the system working. But once you remove that fence, then this whole process gets underway, and that's clearly what's going on. And unfortunately, we've sat and watched this unfold for 3 years now and longer. Now, solutions for this, Simon. What does somebody do about it when they really get their hands around it as clearly as you have? What actions do you take?
Well, I think, as I mentioned earlier, if you just step back and look at the big picture, does it really make sense for somebody to keep all of his or her assets and income and resources and property and business and et cetera all in the same place, particularly when that country happens to be completely insolvent? And again, not a sensationalist assertion. It's a statement of fact. And the fact is, it doesn't make sense to do that, because we can look to we don't even have to look to history. We don't even have to crack open a history book to see. We can just look to what's happening today. I mean, we saw what happened to people last year in Cyprus, what happens when a government government goes bankrupt, banking system's insolvent and so forth. I mean, that's an entirely, different topic altogether. But I mean, the fact that most people don't realize at all that their banking system is actually quite unsafe, that most banks are very illiquid, that many of them are actually insolvent or very poorly capitalized. And again, this is something that sort of goes part and parcel with debt-laden, bankrupt nations. It makes all the sense in the world for people to just look around the world. This is almost 2015. It's not like we have to get on a boat and go some perilous journey to the other side of the planet and deal with, plagues and, natives that want to kill us. It's not a big deal. We can go to another country and find the right place for our savings. Where's the best place in the world to hold capital? We should go to a place where we can achieve a better rate of return, something that actually, when adjusted for inflation, might actually be positive, where the banks are actually liquid and well capitalized, where they've never had a banking failure, et cetera. There are places in the world where the banks are actually still sound, where it's outside of your home country, where it can't be, where you can hold cash in different currencies, where you can actually decide to not even hold fiat currency at all. You can actually get back to holding precious metals or buying real assets. If you're looking for actually better investment returns, where you think, what am I going to do with my money? I've got savings. I need to invest my savings. What am I going to do? I'm going to hold money in a bank and get 1/100th of 1%. I'm going to park it in the stock market at its all-time high. You look around and think there's probably not really any investment options either, but there are. There really are. There's options and opportunities out there if you're willing to expand your thinking to the entire world. There's a lot of really great opportunities out there. And in this day and age, we have the ability, we can afford to use the technology at our disposal to look for every one of those aspects of our life. Where's the best place in the world to buy and store gold? Where's the best place in the world to hold my sort of fiat currency savings? Where's the best place in the world to own and hold property and generate solid cash flow and passive income and so forth? Where's the best places in the world for each of these things? And that's going to be different for different people based on their circumstances. But if you look at the entire world as a resource, there are literally limitless opportunities, and that's the really exciting thing, is because we have those options available, and we have those opportunities, and we have those resources and technologies all available to us.
Now, this is what Sovereign Man Confidential as an intelligence service targets, to try and explain, isolate, flush out these opportunities?
Sure, absolutely. That's the idea.
Now, you have 6 pillars of self-reliance, I noticed, as a kind of a bedrock for getting your hands around financial sovereignty in the 21st century. Do you want to explain those to our listeners?
Well, the 6 pillars is just sort of a way of thinking about things. I think a lot of your listeners intuitively understand this, that as no matter what your age is, I think the things that we were told growing up, we were told so many things, so many truths that just simply no longer apply today. And the 6 pillars is really just a way of thinking about those sorts of things, including different things like declaring your economic independence, for example. This is a very important pillar. Picking your battles, choosing how you want to spend your resources, our time, our money, our energy. These are not infinite resources. These are all very finite resources. We all have limitations on these, and we have to make decisions about how we allocate those resources. And so on one hand, I'll just, as an example, I know there's a lot of folks who have feelings of patriotism, and they'll look around and they'll think, this is not the country I grew up in. And they feel compelled to do something about it. They want to do something. They want to change something. They want to change the system. And I would encourage people to try and look at the situation rationally. It's an incredibly noble thing to do, to want to improve one's country and try and make the system better. But the reality is that the problem has gotten so large that the only way to really change it, and I'm actually going to send out something to my own readers to sort of demonstrate this mathematically, but it's gotten so large it's really beyond repair. And again, not a sensationalist assertion, it's really just a statement of fact, of mathematical certainty. And so if you have finite resources, does it make sense to sort of stand out in the street with petitions and work on a phone bank and call, friends and neighbors and try and start a grassroots campaign to throw the bums out and all that sort of thing? Or does it make sense to actually invest that time and energy and the money and the resources and so forth into making sure that your children and your grandchildren, your family and your friends and your loved ones are well looked after and taken care of? Because only by then, from a position of strength, once you've been able to save everything that you've worked for to build for your entire life, and once you actually can engage in the opportunities that are out there in the world and can actually generate rates of return that are actually positive when adjusted for inflation without having to take significant risks. Once you've set yourself up in that way, then you can actually go back and try and effect change, but doing so from a position of strength, not from a position of fear. And I think that makes all the difference in the world, and that's really what the 6 pillars you alluded to is all about.
Interesting perspective, and I couldn't agree with you more. Not a common one. It must have been very difficult for you to go through this transition, having graduated from West Point, been part of Desert Storm, sworn allegiance, to come to these kinds of realizations.
Well, I'm a bit younger than that. Desert Storm was the one in the 90s. That was when, of course, Saddam Hussein was an ally of the United States. He went bankrupt fighting the Iranians throughout the 80s and decided to make up for it by invading Kuwait. And George H.W. Bush sent 650,000 troops to the desert in Saudi Arabia to try and stop him. That was back in 1990-91. I came out. I graduated in 2000, almost 15 years ago, and so I was actually part of I guess what they call the global war on terror and Operation Enduring Freedom and so forth.
Still, nevertheless, a very difficult transition.
Oh, it's tell me about it. It was to sort of sit there in the desert wearing the uniform and come to these realizations that much of what you've been brought up to believe is is a complete myth. That's a very difficult thing to have to deal with. But it affected my life in a profound way and took me on a journey that's been incredibly interesting, to say the least.
I think a lot of listeners appreciate what you would have went through, thinking that you now have. And I don't hear anything bitter. I hear creative, structured, new, a positive future that's out there for those who are willing to take control of their own destiny. And I believe that's what America was founded on.
I agree with you entirely. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. The old way of doing things is gone. I mean,
it's gone. Recognize that.
Right, that's the important thing. If you can think differently and more creatively about the ways to do things, then I think there's a very, very bright future ahead for you. There's a ton of opportunity out there and a ton of resources, and I think they're there for anybody to take advantage of who's just willing to have the intellectual curiosity and the courage to actually look at it.
Yeah, that's what I can't stress more, is the opportunities have never been greater, but they're not what you thought they were before. And you've got to get outside the box, and you have to let go of some mistaken beliefs. But the world's not coming to an end. We've got some exciting things, and I think the best in the future in the world is still ahead of us. But it's never has been an easy road, nor will it be. Closing comments, a key message you'd like to leave with our listeners, Simon?
Just that, exactly. I would just really encourage folks to take a very sobering and objective view of what's happening. Be data-driven. Don't be emotional-driven. Be very rational. Don't listen to the guy on the TV, or don't even listen to me. Go find out for yourself. Just look. The data is out there. The numbers are there, and the numbers don't lie. Numbers don't feel positive. They're not optimistic or pessimistic. The numbers are truth, and the truth will really tell you what the real situation is. And once you kind of see that for yourself, it's very eye-opening. I encourage you to have that intellectual curiosity to find out for yourself.
How can our listeners read more about your work or follow you and your thinking?
Well, our website is sovereignman.com. We have a free daily e-letter that goes out to, I guess, close to 200,000 people now, and I think it really resonates with a lot of folks. It's that message of freedom is still out there, it's still alive, it still exists. There are solutions, there are opportunities, and we want to bring those to as many people as possible.
Simon, thank you for the time. I really appreciate it. Great conversation. I look forward to having you back again.
Absolutely. I enjoyed it. Thanks so much.
Talk to you again. Bye.
This has been Gordon T. Long, editor and publisher of GordonTLong.com. New recordings are posted regularly and can be found at GordonTLong.com. New show notifications are available through RSS feed, iTunes, and other social networking venues at GordonTLong.com.